In the middle of a forgotten forest, silence was shattered by a haunting cry, deep, raw, and filled with desperation. It didn't come from a human, but from something just as vulnerable. A massive grizzly bear had fallen into the dark depths of an ancient stone well hidden beneath fallen leaves and time. His roars echoed off mossy walls, unheard, till a small cub appeared from the trees, panting, frightened, and alone. What happened next brought together strangers, tested courage, and reminded the world of what it means to fight for life. This is the story of a rescue that defied fear, and a bond that will break your heart wide open. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us share more powerful stories like this. One with the world. It was just after sunrise when hikers, passing through the Glen Reach forest, heard something strange. A low, rumbling sound, not thunder, not wind. It came in waves, shaking the ground beneath their boots. At first, they thought it might be rockfall from the cliffs above, but as they followed the noise, it grew louder, more guttural, unmistakably alive. They reached a clearing, surrounded by ancient pines, where an old well sat crumbling in the middle of overgrowth. None of them had seen it before. It was hidden, sunken, covered in vines and decay, and from within its stone walls, the cries continued. One of the hikers, Thomas, cautiously leaned over the rim and gasped. Down at the bottom, barely visible in the shadows, was a full-grown grizzly bear, mud-covered, bleeding in places, and terrified. He wasn't roaring to scare, he was calling for help. But then they saw something even more shocking. A cub, small, shaking, standing silently beside the well, eyes locked on the men, as if he had been waiting for them. His paws were raw, his fur matted from running through brush. He didn't growl, he didn't run. He just looked at them as if pleading. One hiker backed away. "Is this real?" Another whispered, "He brought us here." Within minutes, a local forest ranger, Mateo Rojas, arrived after receiving the hiker's emergency call. Experienced.com, and no stranger to wild rescues. Mateo took one look down the well and knew this wouldn't be simple. The bear had likely fallen in during the night. There were no marks of a struggle around the edge, just claw scrapes on the mossy stones. He had been trying to climb out for hours, maybe longer, but the cub had gone for help. Mateo immediately contacted a professional wildlife rescue team. Time was everything. The bear was exhausted, dehydrated. His cries were becoming fewer until help arrived. Mateo and the hikers stayed put. They built a perimeter, left water for the cub, and kept a respectful distance from the well. The air was thick with tension and something else. Hope, because in the middle of that forest, in a place forgotten by maps, a wild animal had done the unthinkable. He had trusted humans, and now it was their turn to prove they were worthy of that trust. The call came in at 8:47 a.m. Adult grizzly, trapped in a well, possibly injured, cub nearby. Location, Glen Reach Forest, Eastern Sector. Within minutes, a rescue team from the Wildlife Emergency Response Unit, WERU, was mobilized. Their headquarters, located 45 miles away, had handled all kinds of wildlife. Emergencies: elk stranded in floods, mountain lions tangled in fences, but a full-grown grizzly bear stuck in a well was a rare and urgent case, especially with a cub involved. Lead responder Erika Lowe, a seasoned field rescue coordinator, reviewed the drone images sent from the forest ranger's satellite device. The well was deep, too deep, and dangerously narrow. "We don't have much time," she told her crew. "If he's in shock or dehydrated, we could lose him, and that cub isn't leaving his side. Let's move." Back in the forest, Mateo kept a close eye on both bears. The cub hadn't moved more than a few feet since the rescue call went out. He occasionally sniffed the air, looked toward the trees, maybe hoping for someone, or something, to arrive. The adult bear, still down in the darkness, was now silent. Occasionally, a weak paw scraped against the stone, but the energy was fading. When the WERU truck pulled up to the dirt access road, nearly 90 minutes later, the team jumped out with full gear, climbing harnesses, safety ropes, pulleys, tranquilizer darts, in case sedation was needed, and emergency vet supplies. "We'll need a double anchor system," Erica said, scanning the terrain. "Stable points here and here. We lower a volunteer down, we assess, then we extract." Mateo offered to help, but Erica insisted one of her climbers handled the descent. "You've done your part. Let us get him out." The cub, hearing the voices in gear, stepped closer to the well, his eyes wide and fixed on every move. Erica noticed. He's watching us. He knows. The team worked quickly. Ropes were fastened, harnesses locked. A climber named Joel was selected to go down, steady, experienced, and calm under pressure. As Joel was lowered slowly into the shaft, the forest seemed to hold its breath. 10 feet, 20, then 30. "I see him," Joel called out. "He's breathing, eyes open, still alert, but he's barely moving. I need the stretcher platform and a blanket now." Above, the team began assembling the retrieval rig. Down below, Joel spoke softly to the bear. No sudden movements, no fear, just quiet words, useless in language, but essential in energy. "We've got you, big guy," he whispered. "You're not alone." As the final lift system was secured, the cub gave a single, low sound, a kind of hum. It wasn't panic, it was relief. And then, slowly, inch by inch, the adult grizzly bear began to rise. The pulley groaned under the weight of the massive creature. Every inch mattered. The harness, expertly strapped around the bear's upper body and front limbs, tightened as Joel radioed instructions from inside the well. "Slow and steady, he's not resisting, just tired. Keep the tension even." The adult grizzly bear, nearly 600 pounds of muscle and instinct, was now entirely at the mercy of a rope system and a team of humans he didn't know. But something in his body language had shifted. There was no panic, no thrashing, only surrender, maybe from exhaustion, maybe from trust. The cub paced in a small circle, never leaving the edge. He let out soft grunts, short and rhythmic, as if communicating encouragement to his parent. Nearby, the hikers watched in awe, one filming with trembling hands, whispering, "This is something else." Midway through the lift, a sharp snap pierced the quiet. One of the primary ropes had frayed, pushed to its limits by the stone edge. The rig jolted hard, causing the bear to shift his weight in panic. He groaned a deep, thunderous cry that echoed through the trees. "He's slipping," someone shouted. "Back up rig, now." Erica barked, running to reinforce the anchor. The team swarmed into action, attaching a secondary tether and rebalancing the weight. Matteo instinctively stepped closer to the cub, who had lowered himself, flat on the ground, visibly distressed. For 10 breathless seconds, everything teetered between success and disaster. Then, the lines held. The bear stopped moving. Joel radioed again. "We're good. He's stable. Keep going." The final feat took forever. The moment the bear's massive head emerged above the well, a quiet gasp escaped everyone nearby. Covered in mud, fur-clumped, bleeding from one paw, he blinked slowly, sunlight touching his face for the first time in who knows how long. The team laid down a padded tarp beside the well. As the harness was unclipped, the bear simply rolled over onto the soft surface, his chest rising and falling in deep rhythmic breaths. He was alive. The sun had passed its highest point, casting longer shadows through the Glenreach forest as the rescue team sprang into post-operation protocol. The adult grizzly was out of the well, but his condition remained fragile. He had lost a significant amount of strength, and the muddy water in the well had soaked his coat, chilling him to the bone. Erica crouched beside him, her gloves stained with dirt and blood. "Respiration is shallow. Pulse is strong but fading. We need to warm him fast." They wrapped the bear in insulated thermal blankets, the kind used for wilderness emergencies involving hypothermia. While the team continued assessing him, a veterinary specialist named Dr. Jordan arrived via chopper. He was in his 60s, calm as stone, with decades of experience saving wild animals under the worst conditions. He moved quickly to the grizzly's side, and gently placed a hand on the cub's head as he settled next to his parent. The cub didn't move away. It was as if the young bear somehow sensed this man had come to help. "Let me work," Dr. Jordan said softly. Saline was administered. A pain management injection followed. The bear flinched but didn't fight. He was done fighting. All that remained was endurance and time. "Internal temperature is still dropping," Erica warned. Dr. Jordan nodded, then turned to the crew. "Get the portable heat unit here. We're not moving him yet." An inflatable, insulated tent was quickly erected around the bears to protect them from wind and falling temperature. Outside, Matteo paced restlessly, checking on the hikers, coordinating communications, watching the forest line for other animals ever alert, ever present. The cub had not moved from his parent's side. He laid his small head on the grizzly's chest and didn't blink. Inside the tent, a strange, quiet, settled dot. It was as though all of nature, the trees, the clouds, even the wind, were holding their breath. The monitors beeped. The warm air flowed. The massive grizzly took one more breath, then another, and another slightly stronger dot. Dr. Jordan looked up. He's stabilizing. Outside, Matteo closed his eyes in silent thanks. They weren't done yet, but they were winning. And somewhere in the forest, the story of a cub who ran for help, a team that refused to give up, and a wild heart that refused to quit, was just beginning to echo beyond trees, beyond wires, beyond the wild. Because sometimes, survival is not just instinct, it's hope, and sometimes, hope is enough to bring a creature back from the edge. The forest surrounding the rescue site had grown eerily quiet. The thick canopy above filtered the golden late afternoon sun into warm streaks of amber and orange. Inside the thermal shelter, the grizzly bear's breathing was steadier, though labored. The cub had fallen asleep beside his parent, his tiny paw resting on the older bear's chest, rising and falling gently. The rescue team exhaled in cautious relief, but the silence didn't last. From the tree line came a crack, then a rustle. The tension returned in an instant. Matteo raised a hand. Hold. Erica stood from the makeshift med station and scanned the woods. Dr. Jordan narrowed his eyes, then movement. From between the shadows emerged another grizzly, not a threat, not charging, just watching it, was an adult female. Her coat was lighter in color, and her face bore the marks of age and travel. She stood at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the underbrush, her head tilted. Joel whispered, "That's another bear." Erica nodded slowly. Could be part of their group, maybe their mate, maybe a sibling. Dr. Jordan stepped forward carefully. Everyone still. No sudden movements. The cub stirred. His head lifted slowly. When he saw her, his ears perked. He gave a tiny cry, not out of fear, but recognition. The female stepped forward, cautiously, step by step, her body low, non-aggressive. The team instinctively backed away, giving her space. And then the unimaginable happened. The cub stood, legs wobbly, eyes locked on the newcomer, and walked slowly across the grass. When he reached her, he leaned into her chest. She licked his head. She had come for him. The cub turned back toward the thermal shelter and made a soft sound. She followed. When she approached the still body of the trapped grizzly, she paused. She sniffed. She stared. Then very slowly she laid down beside him. The team could hardly breathe. 3 bears, Erica whispered. A family doctor. Dr. Jordan lowered his head. They never leave each other, not unless forced. No one dared interfere. Instead, they watched as the cub curled once again against his father. The female pressed close, and together, in the dimming light of the day, 3 wild hearts shared warmth, history, and maybe, for the first time since the fall, peace. Matteo finally broke the silence. We've been trying to rescue him, but maybe she was coming too. Everyone nodded. Not a word more was needed. Sometimes, the most powerful moments in rescue aren't the ones we create, they're the ones we witness. And this moment, 3 bears reunited on forest soil, was one that would stay with them forever. Nightfall swept in quietly, the forest blanketed in soft blues and deep grays. The emergency lights surrounding the rescue site cast long, glowing halos through the mist. The grizzly father, now surrounded by his cub, and the female, showed small but vital signs of improvement. His breath, deeper, steadier. But the danger wasn't over. Dr. Jordan adjusted the 4 fluids one last time. If he makes it through tonight, his odds go up dramatically, he said, his voice low. But we still have a decision to make. Erica frowned. About what? He turned to face the group gathered under the mobile shelter. Whether to transport him to a wildlife care facility, or let them stay together in the wild. The team went quiet. Taking him in gives us control. Monitors, surgery if needed, full recovery setup, Jordan explained. But separating him from the cub and her might do more harm than good. Matteo looked toward the bears. The cub was nestled tightly against his father's side, chest rising and falling in sync. The female bear had not moved for hours, except to occasionally nuzzle the wounded bear's neck. She came for him, Matteo said. She didn't have to, but she did. I know, Jordan said, almost whispering. And that's why this decision isn't just clinical. It's human, Erica added. If we let them go too soon, and he collapses again, we might not get another shot. The team stood in silence as wind rustled the leaves above. Then, as if on cue, the male bear stirred. He lifted his head. It was only for a second, but it was enough. The cub immediately perked up. The female let out a soft chuff, a low vibrating sound of reassurance. The male groaned softly, then lowered his head again, eyes open, aware. Alive. Jordan turned to the others. Let them be. But what if we'll monitor from a distance? Trackers, cameras. But this is their fight now. No one argued. Instead, the rescue team removed the final medical cables, disconnected the foreline, and gently rolled back the thermal wrap. The bears stirred, adjusting to the sudden openness. The male shifted, struggling slightly to sit upright. But did. The cub chirped. The female leaned in, bracing him with her shoulder. Together, the three began to move slowly, haltingly toward the tree line. The rescue team stepped aside, not as saviors, but as witnesses. No one spoke as the bears disappeared into the brush. When the last rustle of leaves faded into the night, Dr. Jordan. 3 weeks later, the trail was quiet. Morning fog clung to the forest floor like a secret, wrapping every branch and fern in silence. Mateo walked alone now, boots crunching softly over pine needles and damp leaves. In his hand, he held a single wildlife camera just retrieved from the site near the old stone well. He hadn't stopped thinking about them. The bears. Not for a single day. He reached the clearing where it all happened. The well was still there, now covered and safely barricaded with stone and wood to prevent another fall. But what truly caught his eye was something different. Tracks fresh. Bear tracks. Mateo knelt beside them. One set was large, deep, adult, male. Another, smaller, likely the female. And then, the tiniest, the cub. He smiled. They'd made it. He turned on the camera, scanning through footage. The motion sensor had captured grainy but clear images. The three bears walking together through the glade, the male trailing behind but upright. The female would pause every so often, waiting. The cub darted between them, playful, free. One clip made him stop. That it was dusk. The family had stopped beneath a tree. The male bear, still clearly healing, lay down slowly, resting. The cub curled against him, and the female sat close, her eyes scanning the forest. And then, the male bear did something Mateo hadn't seen him do before. He looked up toward the lens. As if to say, "We remember." Tears filled Mateo's eyes, not because of pain, but because he knew, beyond science, beyond explanation, that this rescue had mattered, that it had not been forgotten, that wild creatures could remember compassion not in words, but in the way they lived, the way they protected, the way they came back. Later that day, the footage was shown to the entire rescue team. No one left the room untouched. Even Dr. Jordan, the stoic man of medicine, wiped his eyes before walking outside to breathe. The story went viral across conservation networks, then national news, not because of fame, but because it reminded people, distracted people, that kindness still mattered, that courage existed in the forest, that a cub who ran for help, a team who risked everything, and a bear who survived the fall, had taught the world what it means to never give up. As for Mateo, he returned to Glenreach every few weeks. He never sought out the bears, but he left apples sometimes near the clearing. And once, just once, he found 3 left behind. Half-eaten. The cub's way of saying thank you. Maybe, but Mateo didn't need proof. He already knew. If this story inspired you, remember, compassion is a choice and it changes lives. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes in the power of hope, rescue, and second chances. A man clinging to the edge of a rocky cliff. One wrong move, and he falls 200 feet. Below him, a terrified grizzly bear cub cries for help, trapped on a narrow ledge, its tiny paws bleeding from the climb. No one expected what this man did next, and no one could have predicted how this moment would change the lives of a man, a cub, and an entire forest. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Daniel Reyes had always found peace in the mountains. A 42-year-old wilderness guide and combat veteran, Daniel had seen war, chaos, and grief, But here, in the windswept ridges of Montana's Flathead National Forest, he found something that finally made sense. Silence, space, and survival stripped of noise. He hiked alone that morning, following a trail he'd walked a dozen times before, his boots steady on the frost-tipped grass. The pine trees whispered in the wind, and the sound of distant ravens echoed off the canyon walls. In his backpack, a water flask, a first aid kit, and a worn photograph of his late daughter. Her name was Emily. She had loved animals, especially bears. Then came the sound that changed everything. At first, Daniel thought it was the wind, but then it came again, a sharp hypergit wail. He froze. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a hawk. It was something else. He crept toward the cliff's edge, heart suddenly pounding, and that's when he saw it. About 30 feet below, wedged between two jagged boulders on a narrow outcropping, was a grizzly bear cub. Its fur was matted with mud and sap, and it shook with fear, trying to pull itself up a few inches, only to slide dangerously close to the drop. It looked no older than a few months. There was no sign of the mother. Daniel's breath caught. His instincts screamed to stay back. A lone cub meant a mother wasn't far, and a mother grizzly could be death. But something else overrode his fear. That cub was going to fall. He checked his surroundings. No phone signal, no radio, just him, his gear, and a crying animal hanging between life and death. Daniel took a breath, tied a length of his rope round a tree trunk, secured the knot with trained precision, and dropped to his knees. Slowly, he inched his body over the cliff's edge, anchoring his feet, one hand gripping the rope, the other reaching toward the ledge. The cub saw him. It backed away in terror, its small frame trembling. "Easy," Daniel whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." The wind picked up, gravel loosened under his boots. He was now hanging, barely supported, knees scraping the rock, blood trickling down his shin. Another foot lower. Closer. The cub let out a desperate whimper, a sound so familiar it cracked Daniel's chest open. Emily's voice echoed in his memory. "If you ever find a bear in trouble, Daddy, promise you'll help." His hand brushed the cub's back. It didn't run, and that's when the ground above shifted. A branch snapped, and the rope jerked. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't panic. He just looked that cub in the eye, and made a choice that would define his life forever. Daniel's grip tightened as the rope jerked again. The bark of the pine tree anchoring it cracked, raining dirt down the cliff face. 30 feet below the trail, his body swayed against the rock, scraping his shoulder with every gust of wind. The cub didn't move. It simply stared up at him, its dark eyes wide, not with fear, but with something Daniel couldn't quite name. It wasn't trust, but it wasn't fear anymore either. He slowly lowered his left leg, until the toe of his boot touched the narrow ledge. The cub shrank back slightly, pressing into the rock wall, its breathing fast and shallow. Daniel didn't make sudden movements. He pressed his back to the cliff, keeping his hand on the rope as he whispered softly, "Easy now. I've got you." Years in combat zones had taught him control, patience, but nothing prepared him for the trembling life now inches from his boots. He knelt carefully, digging into his pack with one hand and pulling out a protein bar. Not perfect, but something. He peeled the wrapper and set the bar down between them. The cub sniffed the air. Then took a single hesitant step. Daniel kept his eyes low. The cub crept forward, inch by inch, until its snout touched the bar. It began to chew, pausing only to glance at him. That's when Daniel made his move. Slowly, so painfully slow it felt like hours. He reached into his side pouch and retrieved a soft climbing sling, a wide band of reinforced fabric used to secure gear. He looped it around his arm, then gently nudged the edge of it beneath the cub's belly. At first, the cub flinched, but the moment passed, and then it let out a soft shuddering breath, almost like surrender. He tightened the sling, not enough to hurt, just enough to hold. Then he radioed to no one, just out of habit. Cub secured, commencing lift. He braced his legs, and stood. The cub dangled awkwardly against his chest, wrapped in the sling, and cradled by his body. It squirmed once, then calmed, but the real danger was above, because as he looked up at the trail, he saw it. The pine tree, weakened by years of storms, was beginning to lean. His rope anchor was slipping, and he was still 20 feet below the edge. He dug his boots into the rock face, pulled once, twice. His muscles burned with effort. Sweat stung his eyes. One foothold gave way. He slipped just inches, and his knee slammed the cliff wall. The cub let out a panicked yelp. "Hang on, buddy," Daniel gasped. "Just hang on." He pushed again. This time the earth above shifted again. Then a shadow passed overhead, a sound soft at first, then louder. A growl, no, not a growl, a low, guttural breath. He turned his head slightly, and saw her Dot, the mother. A fully grown grizzly bear now stood at the top of the trail watching. Her massive frame still, her ears pinned forward, her eyes locked, not on her cub, but on him. And Daniel realized, if she lunged now, there'd be no time to explain, no time for anything at all. Daniel froze. His boots pressed hard against the cliff face, one trembling under strain. The cub, now bundled against his chest in the sling, made a soft whining sound, a noise no bigger than a breath, but enough to carry up the rock wall like thunder. And above them, the mother grizzly didn't move. She stood at the edge of the trail, massive and terrifying in her silence. Her dark brown coat rippled slightly in the wind, muscles tensed as if torn between rage and instinct. Her nose flared, catching the scent of her cub. Her eyes narrowed. Daniel didn't speak. He barely even breathed. He knew that one wrong move, one blink of hesitation could mean death. She could kill him in 3 seconds. But she didn't. She didn't growl. She didn't charge. She just waited. And Daniel knew exactly why. He wasn't the enemy. Not yet. But he was something more dangerous. A stranger holding her child. The rope creaked again, breaking the stillness. Daniel grimaced and adjusted, his grip pressing his back hard into the cliff for balance. His legs shook. The cub whimpered. Dot. The mother took a step forward. "Please don't," he whispered. "We both want the same thing." He looked up again, and for just a second, their eyes met, and something passed between them, not understanding, not trust, but a quiet recognition. She saw the sweat dripping from his forehead, the bleeding gash on his knee, the trembling hands clutching her cub like he was holding his own heart, and she didn't move. Daniel took it as a chance, maybe the only one he'd get. With a groan of effort, he reached up and gripped a protruding root. His shoulder screamed. In pain, he pulled inches, just inches, until his foot found another hold. The cliff scraped his side raw. The cub wriggled against his chest but didn't fight. "Almost there," he muttered. "Almost." Above, the mother bear stepped backward, not in retreat, but in strange acknowledgement, clearing a narrow path to the trailhead. And then, with one final surge of strength, Daniel hoisted himself over the edge. He collapsed on the forest floor, panting, his face in the dirt. The cub tumbled gently beside him, unharmed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he looked up, and she was gone. No roar, no charge, no attack, just the rustle of underbrush as a massive shadow melted into the woods. Daniel sat there in stunned silence, one hand resting on the cub's back, the other gripping the rope as if it still held him to life itself. He didn't know why she spared him. Maybe she'd seen something in him, not a predator, not a threat, but a man acting on instinct, as pure and fierce as her own. Whatever it was, he was still alive, and the cub was safe. But this story wasn't over, because as Daniel rose shakily to his feet, the cub still by his side, he heard something else start. More footsteps, coming fast, from multiple directions. Low growls echoed through the trees. And Daniel's heart sank. He hadn't just returned the cub, he had walked into the center of an entire grizzly pack. The forest had never felt so silent. Daniel stood motionless on the edge of the trail, bloodied, exhausted, and face to face with the very wilderness he had once escaped to. For peace. But this wasn't peace. This was a test of everything he thought he knew about survival. The first bear appeared between the trees, tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with slow, deliberate steps. Its nose twitched, catching the scent of the cub now pressed tightly to Daniel's leg. Then came the second, younger, leaner, its coat glinting with moisture from the nearby river. Within seconds, two more emerged, each from different angles. One circled wide, flanking him from the right. The other moved behind him, silent as smoke. 4 fully grown grizzly bears, all watching him. Their mother had vanished into the shadows, but now it was clear. This was her family, a wild, bonded group, not a pack like wolves, but something just as territorial, just as protective. And Daniel was the outsider who had touched their cub. His heart hammered in his chest. His body screamed for flight, but running would be suicide. He stood his ground, eyes down, posture low. not submissive, but respectful. "No harm," he whispered. "No harm done." The cub looked up at him, wide-eyed, uncertain, then toddled forward. It gave a soft huff and walked to the nearest adult, nudging against its massive paw. The larger bear glanced at Daniel once, then lowered its head to sniff the cub. No sound, no aggression. And then something strange happened. The bears began to move, not toward Daniel, but around him. One brushed past his shoulder, its massive frame nearly knocking him off balance. Another nudged the cub back into the center of the group. They weren't attacking. They were reclaiming one of their own. Daniel let out a shaky breath. For a moment, he thought it was over. But then, the oldest male approached. He was massive, larger than any bear Daniel had seen. His muzzle scarred, one eye slightly clouded. He didn't move like the others. He moved like a leader. He stopped 3 feet from Daniel, close enough to end it with one swipe. Daniel didn't flinch. "I didn't hurt him," he said softly. The bear's nostrils flared. He leaned in, and then, to Daniel's utter disbelief, the bear did something he'd never seen before. He bowed his head. Not submission, not threat, something closer to acknowledgement, a gesture that felt ancient, deep. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He didn't dare cry. Not now, not here. The massive bear turned away, nudging the cub gently with its snout. The others followed, and just like that, they were gone, disappearing into the trees as if they'd never been there at all. Daniel stood alone on the trail, heart pounding, knees weak, the sun breaking through the clouds above. He'd survived, but more than that, he had been accepted. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir inside him. Not fear, not adrenaline, but reverence. The forest hadn't taken him. It had let him in. Daniel walked for nearly an hour before he realized how far he'd gone. The encounter with the bears had left his body drained, and his mind clouded with thoughts he hadn't faced in years. Every time he stopped to catch his breath, the forest answered with silence, not hostile, not cold, just watchful, alive. He found a fallen log near a quiet stream and collapsed onto it. Blood still dripped from the gash in his knee, and his hands trembled, not from fear, but from what had just happened. He had looked death in the eye, more than once, and walked away. But the bear cub had looked at him the same way. Emily used to. And that's what hurt most. Daniel reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a worn, folded photo. The edges were frayed, the ink fading in the center. It was Emily, maybe 6 years old, hugging a stuffed bear. Her smile was wild and joyful, the kind of joy only children could know. She had died 2 winters ago. A sudden illness, a week in the hospital, a lifetime of silence after. Daniel hadn't spoken to anyone about her in months. Not his therapist, not his brother, not the friends who had tried to help, and eventually gave up. The wilderness became his refuge, not to find peace, but to forget. But today had changed something. He remembered Emily's voice on their last camping trip together. The way she had said, "If you ever find a bear out here, promise me you won't be scared, just be kind." He had made that promise with a laugh back then, and today, he had kept it. That cub, it had trusted him, even if only for a second. And its family had done something no wild animal had done for him before. Let him go. They'd let him live. It was more than survival. It was something deeper, a lesson, a message. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, stood slowly, and looked around. He knew this forest well. But now it felt different, less like a place he escaped to, and more like a place he was meant to return to. He hiked until sundown, stopping once to wash his wound in a stream. When he finally reached his parked truck at the edge of the forest road, the sky was painted in gold and violet. He sat on the hood, watching the tree line, and then movement. The cub, not far off, just behind a low hill. It stood still, watching him, not approaching, just watching. Behind it, the shadow of the older male bear lingered. Daniel didn't move. He didn't call out. He just raised his hand slowly and nodded. The cub huffed softly, then turned and disappeared into the trees. And with it, Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Grief, maybe, or guilt, or something too deep for words. But it left him lighter, and for the first time in a long time, he whispered, "Thank you." The following morning, Daniel awoke in his cabin, the first night he'd slept indoors in nearly 2 weeks. His leg was bandaged, stiff but healing. The aches in his muscles reminded him that every moment with that cub had been real, not a dream, not a fantasy. He sat with a mug of coffee, staring at the mountain range outside his window. Something had shifted, he couldn't explain it, but everything felt heavier and lighter all at once. He knew he had to go back, not to relive the danger, but to leave something behind. By noon, he'd packed a small satchel, fresh water, energy bars, a thick cloth blanket, and the photo of Emily. He wrapped it in a weatherproof pouch, tucked it into the side pocket, and started the hike back toward the cliff ridge where it had all begun. The forest was quieter now, the kind of quiet that doesn't warn but welcomes. When Daniel reached the outcropping, he stood for a long time, staring at the tree where the rope had been tied. Its bark was stripped in places, the imprint of survival still visible. He stepped to the ledge, slowly, and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour, and then something moved below. At first it was just the rustle of leaves. Then the cub appeared, emerging from a patch of fern, slightly larger than before, but unmistakable. It stopped halfway up a rise, sniffed the air, and looked straight at him. Daniel smiled. "You made it." The cub tilted its head. Behind it, the large scarred male came into view, then the mother. The full group of bears gathered at the bottom of the ridge, quiet, calm, watching. Daniel didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his satchel, pulled out the weatherproof pouch, and gently placed it on the ground at the edge of the ridge. It held the photo, and something else. A letter, folded tightly, addressed only with the words, "To those who never forget." Then he did something he never imagined himself doing. He sat down, legs crossed, eyes level with the wild Dot, and he stayed. For hours. At some point, the cub climbed partway up the hill again, not too close, but closer than before. It sniffed the pouch, pawed at it once, and then laid down. The older bear grunted low, not a warning but a signal. It was okay. Daniel exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of acceptance, of acknowledgement, of something ancient and wordless. When dusk settled over the valley, and the stars began to blink into view, Daniel stood and nodded once more. "Take care of each other," he whispered. He didn't need thanks. He didn't need understanding. The forest had already given him both. Daniel returned to his cabin just after dark. He didn't light the lantern. He didn't turn on the radio. Instead, he sat on the porch steps and let the night wrap around him. The chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the cold breath of the mountain air against his face. He stared into the darkness, and for once, it didn't stare back in pain. He felt peace, a rare kind, the kind that doesn't come from answers, but from understanding that you don't need them all. Had been a soldier, a brother, a father, and now, somehow, a witness to something sacred. Not a miracle. Not magic. Just life, raw, wild, and honest. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He drove into town at the local ranger station. He asked if there were any programs looking for wildlife volunteers. Not rangers, not enforcers, just people who cared. The woman behind the counter, a quiet woman with sun-wrinkled eyes, looked surprised. "You're the guy who found the cub, aren't you?" He paused. "News travels that fast." She smiled gently. In small towns, bears and men falling off cliffs are hard to keep quiet. He didn't correct her. Instead, he said, "I want to help keep them safe." She nodded and handed him a form. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became something new. He hiked trailheads to remove trash, left out clean water bowls near dry streams during the heat waves, marked areas where wildlife had been spotted and warned hikers to keep their distance. He never saw the bears again, not closely, but sometimes, just sometimes, he'd find signs, a paw print too close to the cabin, a scrap of fur on the fence once, a half-eaten protein bar left on the porch. He never touched it, just smiled and sat down beside it like an old friend had left him a message. Emily's photo stayed in the forest, beneath that weatherproof pouch, but he carried her memory differently now, not like a weight, but like a compass. He began writing again. Not for a book, not for a blog, just pages of letters, some to Emily, some to no one, some to the bears. The final entry read, "I thought I went into the wild to forget, but it remembered me, and in doing so, reminded me who I still am." That spring, Daniel built a small wooden bench near the edge of the ridge, far from the trail, hidden from tourists. On it, he carved a single sentence, "Be kind, even when it hurts." And then he walked away, not from the forest, but toward something, toward healing, toward connection, toward the kind of love that doesn't speak in words, but in acts of courage, in quiet gestures between species, and in the belief that even in the wildest hearts, there's room for compassion. Asterisk, if this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who believes that compassion isn't just for people, it's for every living soul. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons in love, courage, and healing come from the wild. Let's keep telling stories that matter.
A mother hyena wandering through the ashes of a forest that once held her entire world. No cubs, no clan. Just the silence of what she lost in the fire. But when Harper finds a dying grizzly bear cub lying alone in the wreckage, what she does next shocks everything we thought we knew about wild instincts. This story will break your heart, and then slowly piece it back together. Because sometimes love is born in the most impossible places. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. This is more than just a story about animals. It's a lesson in love, sacrifice, and hope. The world Harper once knew had been swallowed by flame. The fire didn't just burn trees. It took voices, warmth, the scent of life. What had been lush, green hunting ground for her clan was now a brittle gray wasteland. Skeletons of trees jutted into a lifeless sky, and even the insects had gone silent. But what hurt most wasn't the silence around her. It was the one inside her. She had lost her cub. No body. No goodbye. Just smoke, a scream, and nothing. For days, Harper wandered the burned earth. Her paw pads were raw, her ribs cut sharp beneath her striped coat. But she wasn't searching for food. What she hunted was meaning. Something. Anything. To keep her going. The sun rose on the fourth day, soft through a blanket of ash. And then she caught a scent. Faint. Fragile. Alive. Harper froze mid-step. Her nostrils flared. She followed it, slowly at first, then with urgency. The smell of milk fur, of something young and scared. Behind a blackened stump, curled into a shivering knot of limbs, lay a grizzly cub. Small, barely weaned. His paws twitched, his breath stuttered. Alone. Harper's body tensed. Her instincts screamed one truth. Prey. But then, a second truth rose quietly, not from her stomach but her chest. A heartbeat. Not mine, but so familiar. She crept closer. The cub didn't react. He was too cold, too weak, maybe even ready to die. She crouched beside him, ears twitching, and instead of striking, she lowered her head and nuzzled his fur. It wasn't food she smelled anymore. It was morning. She licked the ash from his muzzle. She tucked her body around his like she had once done with her own. The cub whimpered, just once, and pressed closer. There, under the skeletal remains of the forest, something impossible began. Not an attack, not a rescue, a bond. Harper didn't understand it yet, but she didn't need to. All she knew was that this cub had no one, and she had nothing left to lose, except the chance to protect him. The fire had taken her child, but maybe, just maybe, it had given her another. Bruno, That's what Harper called him. Not in words, but in sound, in touch, in the quiet rhythm of care that only a mother understands. He didn't come from her. He didn't share her scent, her stripes, her clan, but he responded to her heartbeat. And to her, that was enough, for now. She had to return to the territory. The edges of the old hunting grounds still held caches of food, dens untouched by flame. More importantly, it was the only place she knew how to survive. She carried Bruno gently between her jaws, the way she once carried her own cub, with teeth that could crush bones, now used only for protection. As they approached the outskirts of the territory, Harper's gait slowed. The scent of others reached her first. Her old clan. Hyenas, survivors of the same fire. Stronger now. Reorganized. Watchful. She stepped into view cautiously, ears half folded. The others noticed immediately. They didn't run to her. There were no calls of welcome. They saw the cub. They saw the scent trail. They growled. Bruno whimpered softly. Harper placed him down and stepped between him and the others, her body forming a shield. The clan leader, a broad-chested male named Kuro, advanced. His eyes locked onto Bruno with suspicion. "What is that?" his posture said. Not prey, not kin, not part of them. Harper lowered her head, tail still and flat. A quiet plea. She wasn't asking for acceptance, only tolerance. But that was too much to ask. One hyena lunged toward the cub, not to attack, but to sniff, to test. Harper snapped. A deep warning growl vibrated through the dust. The others recoiled, and just like that, the decision was made. Kuro turned his back. The others followed. And Harper was left alone. Not just unwelcome, exiled. That night, Harper lay curled in a dry hollow far from the dens, her body wrapped around Bruno once again. She licked his fur as he slept, removing the traces of clan and smoke. She watched the stars that blinked above the cracked canopy. She had no place now, no pack, only this cub. But somehow, that made the cold easier to bear. In the days that followed, she hunted for him. Softer food, berries crushed between her teeth. Small prey she shared carefully. When it rained, she blocked the wind with her body. When others approached, jackals, vultures, she didn't growl. She simply stood tall. And they walked away. There was no drama, no grand declarations, just the quiet weight of choice. She had chosen Bruno, not because of instinct, not because of debt, but because her grief had found a second chance. She gave him warmth. He gave her purpose. And though neither of them had a voice to say it, they knew. This was family. Days passed, then weeks. And yet, Harper never once looked back toward the territory she once called home. She no longer belonged to that world. Not the rank-and-file cruelty of her kind, not the cold calculus of survival. Her new world had no hierarchy, no competition, just the fragile rhythm of a mother and cub, trying to exist. Their den was a hollowed log, half burned on one side, resting at the edge of a small creek. Shelter. Water. Not much more. but it was theirs. Harper was relentless. She foraged further each day, avoiding larger predators, learning what Bruno could and couldn't eat. She hunted carefully, never leaving him for long. He was still small, slower than a wild cub, quieter than a bear should be. But he was alive, and his eyes no longer looked lost. Bruno followed her now, clumsily but with purpose. He mimicked her posture when she sniffed the air. He mirrored her low crawl when they passed an eagle's nest. He slept pressed tightly against her belly, breathing in her scent like it was the only thing that made sense in a world that still sometimes shook. One morning, Harper found him pawing at a broken branch, trying to chew it like a bone. She let out a soft, amused grunt, the closest thing to laughter she had made in months. Bruno looked up, eyes shining. He grunted back. And just like that, their language grew. But peace in the wild is borrowed, not owned. One night, Harper woke with her ears twitching. Movement. Heavy. Nearby. She sniffed the air. Something sharp. Not predator. Not prey. Humans. They were close. Flashlights cutting through the trees. Voices. Bruno stirred. Harper pressed a paw against him, not to hold him down, but to calm him. Then she moved silently, shielding him with her body, until the lights passed and the voices faded. She didn't move the rest of the night. She didn't sleep. In the morning, the creek was quieter. The birds didn't sing. But Bruno still woke up warm, still safe. That was enough. Harper didn't know what the future held. She didn't think in seasons or migrations. She thought in moments, in every berry found, every threat avoided, in the sound of Bruno's small feet stumbling after hers, in the deep, echoing truth that she'd sacrificed everything and had not regretted it once. Their home had no name, no markings, no claim. But it had the one thing no other place ever gave her: peace. A home made not from stone or safety, but from choice. Emily had always trusted her instincts. That morning, as the sky blushed with soft gold, something made her turn left instead of right along the patrol path through the recovering forest. It was her 3rd month working at the wildlife sanctuary, a job she'd dreamed about for years. But in all her training, all her lectures and rescue drills, nothing prepared her for what she saw that day. A hyena. Alone. And not just any hyena. Harper. Emily had seen her only once before, weeks back, limping across the burn zone with a distant look in her eyes. She'd made a note in her log. Unusual lone female. Possibly displaced from clan. No signs of aggression. But today, Harper wasn't alone. From behind a patch of tall ferns, Emily watched in stillness as the hyena moved with caution, glancing over her shoulder. Tucked against her flank was something round and brown. Emily adjusted her binoculars. She blinked. A bear cub. No, that couldn't be. But it was. The small grizzly cub, trailing behind Harper, looked up at her with complete trust. They stopped near the stream. Harper nudged the cub toward the water, then sat, alert, watchful, never straying far. Emily's breath caught. This wasn't a predator and prey. This was something else. Later that day, she returned to the station and pulled every camera trap file she had access to from the last 2 weeks. There, grainy but unmistakable, a hyena gently carrying a bear cub across the fallen logs, sharing food, standing over him protectively as a fox passed in the distance. It made no sense, but it didn't have to. Emily wrote in her notes, "Maternal behavior observed. Species barrier appears irrelevant. Monitor closely. Do not intervene." She didn't tell anyone. Some things weren't meant to be data points. Some stories needed silence to survive. From that day forward, Emily visited quietly, never too close, never too often. She left food a distance away, tracked prints without disturbing them, and once laid out a soft cloth soaked in formula milk, just in case the cub needed something extra. It was gone the next morning. Harper never showed herself directly, but Emily felt her presence. And Bruno. Bruno began to grow stronger. One morning, Emily arrived at dawn and found something impossible. Harper, standing just beyond the tree line, Bruno at her side. She didn't run. She didn't growl. She simply walked forward, slowly, carefully, and placed Bruno down near the edge of the sanctuary fence. Then she stepped back, eyes locked on the ranger. Emily froze. This was not surrender. It was trust. Harper looked at Bruno one last time and turned away. No sound, no drama, just a quiet goodbye that carved itself into Emily's heart. Bruno didn't cry when Harper left, but Emily saw the ache in his eyes. He didn't understand the gate, the fences, the new smells, soft blankets, and strange humans speaking in hushed tones. But most of all, he didn't understand why she wasn't there anymore. He ate only when coaxed. He curled against the same patch of wall every night, one paw stretched toward the outside. Emily gave him space. She didn't try to replace Harper. She couldn't. What she could do, what she chose to do, was become a quiet presence. Someone who didn't force trust, but let it grow like moss on stone. Weeks passed. Bruno grew stronger. His fur thickened. His muscles began to fill out. He explored the small enclosure with caution, then with curiosity. But every dusk, he returned to the gate where Harper had left him, waiting, watching. And Emily? She watched too. She noticed something odd. Tracks. Just outside the sanctuary. Never near the main roads. Always near the fence line. Hyena tracks. Same size, same gait, same route. Every few days. Same time. Early dawn, or just before nightfall. Harper. She hadn't left. She was still watching, still protecting. Emily's heart ached, but she understood. This wasn't abandonment. This was letting go the only way Harper knew how, without vanishing. So Emily started something. Small. She placed objects near the fence. Bits of fabric, worn gloves, small stones with Harper's scent left from her path. Bruno noticed. He sniffed, ears perked, body stilled. Then, one evening, Emily brought out a blanket she had gently rubbed along the outer fence, where Harper had passed that morning. She left it in Bruno's sleeping area. He curled into it immediately, closed his eyes, and slept deeper than he had since arriving. The next day, Emily left a piece of fruit near the gate, gone by morning. The next, she left a fur scrap caught on a branch Harper had brushed. Bruno sniffed it, then sat beside it for hours, not waiting to leave, just remembering. There was no plan, only patience. Emily didn't speak much these days. She simply watched and listened, the way Harper had done, the way all mothers do when their children need space to grow, but not to forget. Letting go wasn't absence. It was trust in silence. And in the woods beyond the sanctuary, Harper waited. Not to reclaim, not to interrupt, but to be near, just in case he ever needed her again. And that was enough. It happened on a quiet evening. The air was soft and cool, and golden light spilled through the canopy like honey. Bruno was outside in the main enclosure for the first time, a gentle slope surrounded by natural fencing, trees, and a stretch of open sky. Emily sat nearby, not too close, just watching. Then something shifted in the wind. Bruno froze. His nose twitched. His ears flicked toward the tree line. And Emily knew. She followed his gaze. There, standing just beyond the perimeter, half shrouded in shadow but unmistakable, was Harper. She didn't move at first. She simply stood, still, waiting. Bruno didn't run, didn't whimper. He took one step forward, then another. He reached the fence line and stopped. Harper lowered her body slightly, not crouching to attack, but in deference. Her ears folded back, her posture soft. It wasn't a reunion with fanfare. It was something gentler, older, recognition. She looked at Bruno like a mother checking for signs of pain. He looked back like a child not needing rescue, just the comfort of being seen. Emily felt a lump in her throat. She didn't speak. She didn't dare. This wasn't hers to narrate. This belonged to them. Bruno pressed his nose to the fence. Harper stepped closer. And for a moment, just a moment, their faces touched through the space between. She didn't lick him. She didn't whine. She simply tilted her head. A slow, graceful movement that seemed to say, "I'm still here." Bruno let out a low murmur, half growl, half purr. "I remember." From that evening on, Harper returned more often, never crossing boundaries, never asking for more than that one quiet moment. Sometimes she brought small gifts, half-buried bones, pieces of bark she'd chewed smooth, a patch of fur from a deer, instinctual offerings. Bruno would sit by the fence for hours afterward, turning the objects over with his paws. He didn't need to leave, and Harper never tried to take him. What they had wasn't about territory or possession. It was presence, trust, a love redefined. Emily documented it carefully, but not for science, for memory, because stories like this were not meant to be studied. They were meant to be felt. Harper had returned, not to relive the past, but to quietly watch the future she helped create. And that was enough. Time moved quietly, like mist drifting through trees. Bruno grew stronger each season. His limbs thickened, His steps became sure and grounded, no longer the trembling cub Harper had found in the ashes. He was now a young bear, full of life, curiosity, and grace. He explored the sanctuary's wild zones with confidence, climbed trees, swam, rolled in meadows of spring grass. But every evening, without fail, he returned to the far edge of the enclosure, to the place where the trees gave way to memory, where Harper had first returned. Harper, too, had changed. She was slower now. Her coat, once sleek and fierce, showed streaks of gray. Her steps weren't as smooth, but her eyes, they never dimmed. She watched from the forest's edge, not always close, not always visible, but always there. Emily knew it too. She placed a platform just inside the fence line, where Harper's gifts could be left and seen. Bruno still visited that spot daily, sniffing, touching, remembering. No walls had to be torn down. No reunion needed to be louder than the heart. They had already said everything they needed, without a single word. Then, one spring, Harper stopped coming. Not suddenly, just less often. Bruno still waited, still watched. But he didn't panic. He didn't search. He just sat. One afternoon, Emily found him there, his eyes scanning the tree line softly, not with longing, but with peace. And she understood. Harper was gone. Not in fear, not in pain, but in completion. She had done what she came to do. She had saved him. And now, it was his turn to carry what she gave him. Years passed. Bruno became a guardian of the forest within the sanctuary. Visitors marveled at his gentleness, his strength, the way he watched the world with quiet understanding. Emily often told his story, not to impress, but to teach. That love is not always loud. It doesn't always look like us. It doesn't always make sense. But it leaves something behind. Always. Sometimes, when the fog drifts through the trees and the wind carries the scent of ash and earth, Bruno still stands at the edge of the forest, ears forward, body still, and for just a moment, the world feels whole, because he remembers, and the forest does too. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who believes in the power of love, no matter the shape it takes, because sometimes the strongest bonds are born from ashes and carried in silence for a lifetime.